Well, good morning from Klamath Falls, Oregon. And thank you for joining my podcast today. This is episode 8 of Missionary Stories Abroad. I think this will be my last episode. I'm going to watch the time and see how long it goes and see if I can finish this all in one episode. And so, yes, right now in these I've been kind of trying to go in order, and we are, as a missionary, I'm with my daughter, Brianna, and my son-in-law, Tilo. We are all together in a RV traveling around Europe to share the gospel. And we went in 2 years, we went to approximately 20 countries. And just for those of you that haven't been listening to past ones, I just wanted to explain how we evangelized and what we did. So we would come into a country and go to the main city, the main capital, go to it, find a square. Every European country pretty much has a main square where people gather. And we would find that. And then we would pretty much do this always set up a table. And I would make me and Brianna and Tilo would make these little postcards with a message from Jesus and a hand painted picture, and we would set up a table and place these face down on a table with a big sign. And um, if we knew the language, we would try to make a sign in that language, but usually English worked. Everywhere but Spain, we could say anything in English and people would know what it said. Anyway, we would just invite people to come and pick one of the cards and see if it resonated, if and then basically it was an open door to share the gospel. They were given the card, they could keep it. It was a gift they could take home. We also pretty much 100% of the time would have Tilo doing worship, singing songs, which would bring a crowd sometimes. So that's pretty much what we did. We always, before we started the trip, we tried to find tracks in all the languages. If possible, we found the Gospel of John in the various languages. So we always had the Gospel of John tracks. We always had literature to give away. So if we weren't meeting up with another church or partnering with someone, this is what we tried to do in every country. So I thought I'd begin this episode. I was thinking about some of the hard times we had on the road and just share some of the stories, and then God's gracious protection and provision for us. So the first one is we were driving through Bavaria, and I don't remember if we just stopped working or what happened, but basically we were stranded on the side of a highway. And that was like our greatest fear. What are we going to do if our RV breaks down? It was just a scary thought, especially if we were in a country that we didn't know the language. Well, I think I might have shared before, we did have some other minor things happen, and that was miraculous. Like our electricity, we lost it in our RV, and God miraculously placed us on a street where this man had what we needed for our electricity. But in this story, so we're broken down. We did have insurance. We called um, a tow truck. We called our insurance, and there we were. Wondering, okay, we never had much money. What are we going to do? Um, well, we have to get a hotel. We didn't know anybody in that area. So the tow truck came. Luckily, it was a big enough tow truck to haul our RV plus us inside the tow truck. And he just towed us to, I believe, the nearest mechanic. And God was so good to us. It was a miracle. So that mechanic diagnosed it, and it was the transmission. So we needed a brand new transmission. And it seems like, if I remember right, there was a convention or something in the city, and it was really hard to find a place at a hotel. But regardless, that mechanic said, "Listen, I'm going to hook you up to my electricity. You can sleep here at night." He provided water as well. And so I can't remember if we got a rental car, or I think we got taxis. We would just go into town. I remember evangelizing in that. It was a very small town, but God knew what he was doing. And whether somebody got saved, I have no idea, but we did evangelize in the little town while the mechanic was fixing our transmission. And this felt so miraculous. Another interesting thing that happened, um, I think, we'd come back, I don't know what time, like say 5 o'clock at night, uh, and he would be done working. But anyway, there was a big dumpster there on his lot, and Tilo went over there to throw some trash away. Looked in the dumpster, there was a little ring box, and he lifted it out, and it was a ring with a gemstone, golden ring. It was just a beautiful ring. And more than anything, what for us, it just spoke of God's provision. I am with you. Don't worry. I will take care of you. And I believe Tilo just kept that ring. It was just a beautiful sign for us. And I mean, why would there be a ring in a dumpster in a mechanic shop? It was very odd. Anyway, so that happened, and God took care of us. And then another time, we were in France, and we found out that France was pretty notorious for people trying to break into your RV. And one time we would go to rest stops, places like that, to camp overnight. One time we were in a big rest stop, and we were parked, and a policeman came over to us, and he said, "Don't be here. It's too dark. You need to be where there's lights, or you will get broken into." So that was a provision from God. We wouldn't have known that. We did move, and we're parked by lights, and we were safe that night. But another time in France, we were at another rest stop. We were parked, and this was just crazy. Um, we woke up in the morning. Tilo happened to look out the window of our RV, and he goes, "There's my wallet's out there." He went running out, and there was kind of a stone ledge right there, and there was his wallet on the stone ledge. And we were like in shock. And he knew the wallet. He had kept it in the glove box. And so of course, the first thing he did was look in it. Nothing was taken. Nothing. He had credit cards. He had cash. Nothing. And he remembered waking up in the middle of the night and hearing a noise, hearing a rustling. And I don't know if, so they obviously broke in. They got in that glove compartment, took the wallet. And we wonder if one of us got up, one of us did something, and he got scared and left we don't know. Or an angel. We like to believe that a huge angel made him put that wallet down and take off. So that was a very, to our minds, miraculous protection from our Lord God. It was amazing. But after that time, we learned that a lot of RVers, what they do is Tilo started putting bungee cords, hooking up, wrapping it around one door handle to the other door handle. So if you tried to open the door from the outside, you could not. Maybe he used rope. I can't remember whatever he used. It was very secure, and you could not open those doors. So, lesson learned. That was good. We didn't know that, and God used that incident. And one last one. This happened to me, and I wish I could remember where we were. I think we were in Spain. I don't remember. We were parked in a big lot. I don't know what it was. It was just a big vacant lot. And Tilo and Bree, we had decided they needed time alone. They kind of wanted to go on a date that day, so I would stay there in the motorhome. Um, and again, like I said, we had heard, that in some of these countries, it's notorious to break into RVs and to be careful. So I had we talked about it and thought about one of us would do if we were in the RV alone. Well, it happened to me that day. I had all the shades down. Of course, I had everything locked, but a man came and he started banging, banging on the door and yelling and like, let me in or open up. My heart beat so hard. And I remember I just prayed quickly, but then something within me, I just took all the courage I could and went in the deepest place I could. And I said, go away, or something like that. I was trying to pretend I was a man. Go away. And he pounded for quite a while. He stood there for quite a while. And so I just prayed. I prayed and prayed and prayed. He banged some more. He stood there some more. And finally, he went away. His car was parked there. He went over to his car and drove away. And again, I believe God protected me. I was alone. He could have broken up that door. He might have had a gun, but our God, he protected me. So that was amazing. And as I said at the top, we went to about 20 countries in 2 years. And it's, I can't tell everything. So I'm just picking out things of those 2 years to tell. So the next story I'm going to tell, we went to Portugal, and we partly went there. We have a good friend that is an evangelist in Berlin, Germany, and she works with a ministry called On the Red Box. And that came out of Madrid, Spain. And there's a man, he's the leader of On the Red Box. His name is Jacob Bach. And he is an American, but he's lived in Madrid for about 30 years. And he started preaching. He got this red box that he actually keeps all the tracts and his Bibles in. And he stands on this box in a very famous square in Madrid. It's called Kilometer. What's the name of it? Kilometer Zero, I believe. And in that square, 120 people pass every single day. And so that's why he evangelizes there. Tourists, local, just 120,000. But he gets on the box and he always has a prop, something to grab the eye. And he preaches I believe it's no longer than a 5-minute sermon telling the gospel, explaining about heaven and hell, giving the gospel with a story. And so when we first started evangelizing in Berlin, we worked with a young man named Arnold who was trained by Jacob Bach. And we had our own red box in Berlin. So we were very familiar with Jacob Bach, his ministry. And our good friend Sharon was there for I think it was a weekend conference of training people in Portugal, teaching the method. So we went to Portugal, went to that conference with our dear friend Sharon. And we all went out at the end of that weekend, we went to a square and people took turns preaching on the red box. And I just, as a note, I want to say, there's a square in Berlin. We didn't do the red box there, but it's called Alexanderplatz. And I looked it up. I thought, how many passed through there? Because I knew it was a lot. 360,000 people go through Alexanderplatz every single day. And Sharon, that's where she does the red box. We did it somewhere else when we were part of that ministry, but I can't even say how many times, hundreds of times, we've evangelized in that square of Alexanderplatz in Berlin with teams doing drama, doing worship, preaching, just doing different methods. So those are just great ways to evangelize in squares, capturing, that many people Maybe they go by and they hear you preach. They only hear God so loved the world that he gave his only son as they're walking by. And there's the gospel part of it. So it's a fantastic way. Anyway, so while we were at this weekend conference, we met these two missionaries that lived in Portugal. And my daughter got to talking to them, and they said they have a puppet ministry. Plus, they do outreach where they take a table that it's called maybe literature outreach, where they have a lot of different books explaining Christianity, Bibles, and they just have this table where it says free books, and people can come up and take what they want. And they were just a lovely couple. And so they invited us to join them. So after that conference, we followed them to their home. And I'll never forget going into their home. It was an apartment, like most people in Europe live in apartments. But we went in and it was just freezing in that home. And we didn't take our coats off. And then when they came in, we noticed they didn't take their coats off either. And that's just winter in Portugal. They don't have heating in their homes because it's, 9, 10 months out of the year, it's okay. It's warm. They did have a fireplace and it wasn't lit. I think they might have got a fire going while we were there, which only warmed up the kitchen. But they explained, yes, it's very cold. This is just how we live. We keep our coats on in the house. We have many, many blankets on our bed at night. So that was an interesting thing. But anyway, we just love this couple. And we did go evangelizing with them in a square with that table with the books. And it was really amazing. But the most interesting thing that happened was they lived near the town. I don't know if the town is called Fatima, but near the town that in the Catholic Church, these three peasant children, this happened in 1917, three peasant children saw an apparition of Mother Mary. And that happened in 1917. And supposedly they saw this apparition for the next 6 months, once a month for 6 months. And she identified herself as the Lady of the Rosary. And she spoke to them. She told them things. I guess she predicted World War I and World War II, and some other things. So after 6 months of these peasant children supposedly seeing this apparition once a month, by October of that time period, 30,000 people were gathering to see the lady appear. And in 1930, the bishop at that time declared that this apparition was the Virgin Mary. And so they eventually built a church there, a monument to her. And so to this day, people go there every year to hopefully see an apparition of her or to pray for her. And they believe she's there and they believe that she can heal. And it was unreal. I wish I had pictures. We took many pictures. I wish I had them here to show to you. But first I'll just explain it was huge compound. So they had built a Catholic church on one end, and then there was like a square as big as a football field. And on this end, they built another, I'm saying church loosely, church building. So there was a Catholic one here. And on this one, they built a ecumenical one. And it was for all nations. And that was, when was that? I'm trying to remember. It was 8 years ago, I believe, that we were there. But that gave me the goosebumps because I know an antichrist will come. He will declare a one world religion. And then in the end, he will command that everybody fall down and worship him. So when I saw that the Catholic Church had this ecumenical, and we now have a pope that is ecumenical, anybody can be saved. in the Roman Catholic Church, it's faith plus works. So if you're a good person, so I just could foresee in my spirit, you know, uh, like he's embracing Muslims, he's embracing homosexuals, he's embracing all religions. And if you don't adhere to that all paths lead to God, you're going to be persecuted. And that will be now in our end times. It singles out Jews and Jews, I'm sorry, and Protestant Christians. So it was weird. So they had the two churches, they had the football field, they had part of the Berlin Wall in an area. And that was because supposedly the Virgin Mary predicted that war. But the strangest thing of all, they had this, they had on the outskirts, it was as if it was a market. There was just shop after shop after shop after shop, selling rosaries, selling every kind of Catholic paraphernalia you can imagine, trinkets, just. But the other thing they sold that was so bizarre, along with candles. Candles was a huge, but they had candles that were body parts. Like they might have a leg. We saw lots of women's breasts, babies. And so say you have breast cancer, you would buy a breast and take it to, it was like an altar, take it to be sacrificed, to be burnt to the Virgin Mary, and pray that she will heal your breast cancer. Or babies, say your baby's sick, you buy this wax figurine of a baby and burn it. It was horrifying, horrifying. It just seemed, and I believe is demonic. And the demons want burnt body parts and burnt babies, and they're so deceived to believe that doing that, and also that the Virgin Mary can heal. There's nowhere in the Bible that says we are to pray to Virgin Mary, that she heals, that she's a deity. She was just a woman like you and I, that God chose to have Jesus, but it didn't make her any more righteous or holy than any one of us. So it was just unbelievable and such an eye opener for us. I'd already had my eyes opened. I've shared this in past podcasts about traveling, especially to Prague, and seeing how many people that the Catholics murdered, brutally burned, threw off the tops of towers, how Catholics throughout England persecuted people if they had a Bible, or if they. So then to see this, and this is more because it's modern day, it's still happening. Catholics go there every year. This current Pope honors that place, believes in all this, and it's so wrong. And these lovely missionary couple were telling us they've tried to, that's one of their places they love to go to evangelize, but if they're caught, they are thrown out. So what's this about? The Catholics say, let's all be one. Well, these are Protestants just trying to tell people about Jesus with tracts, and they're thrown off that property. So they were cautious, and we had to be very careful in that area. So just wanted to share that. That was just a fascinating thing. We felt God was so good to let us see and experience that. We ended up wintering in Spain, and Spain turned out to be the hardest country in Europe because we had no idea, because Spanish is pretty much a world language. People either speak English or Spanish, or they speak both. The Spanish people don't learn English because they don't need to. And so it was very hard. None of us speak Spanish, so it was very hard to evangelize there. We did have some Spanish tracts, so that's what we could do. We could pass out tracts in Spain in Spanish language. The other hard thing about Spain was we had a hard time finding a place, like how all over Europe we were able to park in rest stops, places that said, free parking. We could spend the night. In Spain, that was very difficult. They didn't allow you to do it. So we ended up going to a camping area, and we actually spent maybe, I don't know, a couple months. This was another wonderful provision that God provided for us. Tilo, my son-in-law, is not only a worship leader, but he's a very gifted at video editing, at anything to do with the computer. And so he was given a job by a friend who was where was he from? How come I'm forgetting where he's from? But he's a missionary to China. And he gave Tilo this huge job to add English subtitles to all these teaching videos for pastors in China. And this was a job that would take months, but it paid pretty good. And so we wintered in Spain in campgrounds, and Tilo was able to work on this job 8 hours a day, every day working on it. And another blessing that God did for us, and this was in Spain. We were in, I think it's called Malaga. Let's see, I have to find. Malaga. We had gone to Malaga, which is a famous place in Spain that British tourists go there to winter. They own houses there. And we just went there. I can't remember. We were there maybe a week. We were walking around, and we happened to bump into some great friends that Bree and I knew from the time we worked in the Stanton House in England. My first year out as a missionary, after leaving the United States, my daughter and I got jobs at a Christian retreat center just outside of Oxford, England, and it was called the Stanton House. And on staff were Joe and Chris from Scotland, and we worked with them for a year and became very close friends. Anyway, we bumped into Joe and Chris in Malaga. We just couldn't believe it, the timing of it. What a small world. And as usual, we never had money. We just, we ate simply. We went to the grocery store. We bought, what we could and ate that way. It was fine. I mean, we lived great. We didn't want for anything, but never had money for extras. But anyway, so we bumped into Joe and Chris, and they said, "We're taking you out to dinner." And they took us to this place. I remember it was overlooking the water. It was something we never could have afforded. And we just had the most lovely evening with them. But I remember specifically thinking, if anyone from the outside, anyone looked at us, which I guess what I'm thinking is there was a lot of refugees in that town. I don't know what countries they'd be from, but they were all over selling watches or selling hats. And I remember thinking, they look at us and they think, oh, there's the rich tourists, and that they wouldn't know we just live in an RV. We don't own any property. We don't own anything except for this RV. We can't afford to go out to eat like this. But there we were, eating like kings and queens in a beautiful place of Malaga. And it was God. I knew it was God just looking down on us, giving us that gift to run into old friends and bless us with that dinner. It was just amazing. Another cool story. We went to Scotland. There was a couple there. We had never met them, but they were part of the same worship community that we were part of. So we met up with them in Scotland, and they took us to their little church. This was in Troon, Scotland. I think it's about 30 miles from Glasgow. And we went to this little church, and Tilo did some worship for the service. And my daughter, this was so unlike her. And also, this was just a tiny little church. It felt like it was Troon. It just felt like it was in the middle of nowhere. But my daughter just felt led to share something about my son dying, her brother dying, and God's mercy, God's glory. I can't remember what she shared, but just the fact that I did not remember her ever sharing publicly about her brother, but she did here. The guy that preached was a YWAMer. He had just arrived like the day before to this little town of Troon, and he had been somewhere else. I don't remember where he'd been. He preached that morning. He came up to me. He said, "Is your son by any chance Gabe Droptini?" And my jaw just dropped. And Brianna too. And he said, "I knew him. He was in Kona." And then he said he was a legend there. I heard great things about him. I only met him once or twice, but I heard wonderful things about him. And that was just, again, it was so amazing. Um, we were still in grief. I think it had been a year since my son had died. And just for God to tell us that, he was considered a legend in YWAM. And so, anyway, that was just another highlight, another spotlight, another gift of God. We also, I remember evangelizing in the city of Glasgow, which was amazing. I remember meeting a man who he called himself a pioneer, and he was just doing what we were doing on his own, just walking around sharing the gospel. And that was quite amazing. We also evangelized in with our good friend James Brooks in England. That was amazing. Um, and also during that time period, I shared this last time about the wonderful, amazing couple weeks we had in Belarus. And I shared that the pastor of the Every Nation, Christ for the Nations school and church invited Tilo back to make an album. So also during this period, it was a year later, we went back to Belarus and Tilo recorded an album in the studio. It was a very professional studio with a professional producer. And the album is called Back to the Father. My son-in-law's name is Tilo Teschendorf. You can find that online if you want to look for it. It was recorded, with they're like, well, Belarusian, Russian. It didn't maybe have the flavor Tilo longed for, but praise God, it was free. They did this free of charge. And that album, actually, God used that. It opened up this door. After we were done traveling around in the RV, we went back to Berlin, lived there for another 5 years. But we took a time after Tilo's, I shouldn't say album, I should say his CD came out. We went on a tour with a band. We took our RV. We had 2 cars full of people, and we went all over England and Germany. And Tilo did concerts and, talked about his CD, but we always preached the gospel. And so that was amazing that God did that. And again, back in Belarus was wonderful. The pastor allowed Bree and I to minister to the students in the school. And I just wanted to share some funny little things. We stayed with the pastor and his wife, and he has 3 children, a gifted artist daughter, and she did the artwork on Tilo's CD, and 2 sons. One played the drums, one played the piano. They were all gifted to sing. They were worship leaders. We just loved this family. They had a huge, Belarus lives in poverty. And I shared this last episode that if you want to build a house in some of these former communist countries, you don't go get a bank loan. You just pay and build as you go. So they did that. and it was just huge. So there was a nice big bedroom for Brianna and Tilo, a room for me, plus they had a big family room. They had the living room. But it was really funny. They were all on a diet when we got there, and it was an apple diet. And literally all they ate was apples. It was so funny, which was fine with us. And we, of course, got our own food as well. But every morning, I think they lived, oh, I don't know, let's say 15 miles from the Christ for Nations campus. And they had this little tiny car, and the wife and the three sons, me, Brianna, and Tilo, somehow piled in this little car, sitting on laps. I mean, so unsafe, no seatbelts. And she drove like just crazily through this town. And I'll never forget that. Every morning we would go to this campus, and there they had oatmeal for breakfast. We would eat breakfast there. Anyway, so that was just another huge blessing to get to go back to Belarus. And looks like I will be able to finish this. I see I'm at 35 minutes right now. So that's, oh, there was one more. I just remembered another story. I felt prompted by the Holy Spirit to share this. When we were in Belarus, one of the big churches there had a big 24-hour worship where they had continuous worship for 24 hours. And we took part in that. And Tilo and Bree were able to get their own little band and take an hour of worship. But we, like I said, we took part. We were there for that. And so anyway, I remember me and Bree were kind of in the back of the room, just listening to the worship, just worshiping. And I had my eyes closed while I was worshiping. I'm looking down at my old diary here. This happened 8 years ago. But anyway, I had my eyes closed, and suddenly I saw my son Gabe, who had passed away. And you know how I saw him, I don't know if I saw him in heaven, but I just saw my son, and he had the biggest smile on his face, and he was smiling from ear to ear, which brought a smile to my face. So my eyes are closed. I'm smiling, seeing this. And I open my eyes, and my daughter Brianna was looking at me, and she said, "You look so young." Then she said, "I felt like Gabe was standing right here." And he said, "That's how she'll look in heaven." Waves of glory swept over me. I could not believe it. I could not believe it. I knew then I had really seen my son. I wasn't making it up in my head. Brianna saw him. I saw him right then at the same moment. And so that was just a confirmation for me from the Holy Spirit. I wrote a book called Grief Opened the Door to Heaven. And in it, I have visions of heaven, visions of my son. And I often worried, did I really? Am I crazy? And something like this would happen where God would confirm for me, no, you're not crazy. You know, I'm opening a peeking open heaven. I'm letting you see into the heavens, which is closer than any of us think. So just to sum up, to end this series of missionary stories abroad, by the end of 2 years, we got burned out. It was hard. Being together, you know, not having your own space. And so we ended up going back to Berlin. And we ended up selling that beloved RV. It was hard to sell, but we did. And God was gracious. Tilo and Bree were able to get an apartment in a building that some good friends of ours had bought a whole building. And they lived on the very top floor, and then they made rooms. It had been like an office building or a church or something, but they took all the rooms and turned them into flats. And so anyway, Brianna and Tilo were able to get a flat in that building. I lived with a friend for a couple months, went back to the United States for 3 months, felt a little aimless. It was a hard time of my life. wasn't sure what to do. In the meantime, Brianna and Tilo got jobs, wanted to have kids. Brianna got pregnant. And anyway, in the end, God allowed me to get a little tiny, tiny room within that same building. Um, my kitchen was in a hallway, and it was just a kitchen. I mean, it wasn't even a kitchen. It just had a microwave and a sink. And there was a church that also met every Sunday, and they used that kitchen. But I was able to cook at that kitchen. So I just had a little room that was big enough for a bed, and it did have a toilet in there. But that I was happy. I was so thankful to God to give me a place and in a building with other Christians in a community. And so in the next 5 years, I continued on my own to do the prophetic postcard ministry. I ended up going to, I felt the Lord led me to this place. It was in a predominantly Turkish area of Berlin. Berlin, I've shared before, has the second largest Turkish population uh, outside of Turkey. And so every week, it was every Wednesday, they had a Turkish market in this area, which was just fabulous. They had Turkish food, Turkish clothing, just all, it was as if you were in Istanbul at a Turkish market. It was very amazing. And so the Lord led me. There was a, it's called the Ufa Bridge. There was a bridge there, and just around the corner of the bridge was the market. But on this bridge, and actually it's kind of interesting, I believe, let's see, I think the bridge was in the former, darn, I can't remember if it was in the former East or West, but this bridge separated when Berlin had been East Berlin and West Berlin. So that was interesting. But anyway, in Berlin, there's a culture of people, drug addicts, alcoholics, and they just subsist, make a living by stealing bikes. And then they go to this bridge and they sell the bikes. I'm sure it's still going on today. It's been going on for years and years and years and years. They go to this bridge. People know you can get a good bike really cheap there. They don't care that they're stolen. And then also on the bridge are other people. They're not part of the Turkish market, but they're just selling things. And I just felt led to go there. So I would set up my table on this bridge. I remember just being scared to death at the beginning because I was alone. And it was mostly a lot of men, a lot of Turkish men. But anyway, I would set up my signs, my cards, have my Bibles, my tracts. And what happened is some of the guys that sold those bikes and some of the other people that sold on the bridge would come to my table to get a postcard. And these were mostly people that subscribed to the Muslim religion. And it was amazing that they saw the truth. They would get a touch from God, and some of them would come to me week after week. They accepted Bibles. So it was like God gave me a ministry with a lot of the people that sold bikes, and I would share with them, my son had been a drug addict, and that gave us an instant bond. And anyway, it turned out to be a wonderful, really fun ministry. And also, I partnered with, by this time, it was amazing how many missionaries God had sent to Berlin. I think I've said this before. When we decided to come back, to leave Germany, to go back to the United States, we felt like we could, that God had brought so many other missionaries and evangelists. And anyway, so I would join in with other teams, just always trying to find some way to evangelize, with my friend Sharon Reeves, who was doing On the Red Box. But eventually, we all individually, very interestingly, I felt it was time for me to go back home, and I was going to just go. And then God spoke to my daughter. It was right before COVID. Go back, go. And God spoke to my son. I mean, my son-in-law. Well, he'll be happy I said my son. God spoke to my son, Tilo, to go back to the United States and to get his degree and become a pastor. So here we are back in the United States. And so that concludes my series, 8-part series of missionary stories abroad. And I just thank you so much for listening, and hope you continue to listen to my podcasts, which I will continue to be doing as God gives me topics and ideas. You will also look up, I read books. I'm having a hard time finding or discerning what book I should read next, but I have some books I've read, including my own, Grief Opened the Door to Heaven. And so I'm at 45 minutes now. Thank you so much for listening. I just pray that the Lord, our Savior, Jesus Christ, will bless you. If you don't know him, email me, send a message. I would love to introduce you to my Jesus. If you do know him, may your springs go deep in him, deep in the springs of our God. God bless you.